William Hartung is a senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft and an expert on Pentagon spending, the global arms trade, and U.S. nuclear policy. He is the author of Profits of War, Lockheed Martin, and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex, and the co-author with Ben Freeman of The Trillion-Dollar War Machine, How Runaway Military Spending Drives America into Foreign Wars, and Bankrupts Us at Home, which is forthcoming. His articles on national security issues have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Foreign Policy, The Nation, Forbes, The Hill, Defense One, Inkstic, and Responsible Statecraft, all over the map. So, Bill, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Yes. Sorry I missed the beginning. The end of Van's analysis was captivating because, here the bigger kind of structural argument, certainly in Washington. And Taylor's my hero because she digs up new information, which was like a revelation to me that you could do that. I just kind of repeat myself. But I think that the two presentations kind of hit it on the head in the sense we need an understanding of the big picture of why this is happening, but we also need the stories of what's happening with people and how they're affected by this, how they're fighting back. Because especially in this environment of disinformation and I don't know what you call it. I mean, fascism is maybe just an outmoded term for what these people are doing. But anyway, to penetrate all that, I think stories of people, stories of past victories, people taking risks, people showing courage is the only way to break through. For a long time, I used to do these very exquisite analyses of the power of the military-industrial complex, and people say, "Yeah, you're right. We can't beat these people." It was actually demobilizing. And so I think the point is only to look at it to give us ideas of leverage and how to kind of bust up the system. And of course, we need stronger movements across the board. But I'm hoping that the situation we find ourselves in will drive us together and we'll not just play defense, but create a vision of the kind of society we want to build, even if it's not going to happen tomorrow. Which again is not a very Washington kind of thing, because you got to report what you achieved this year. And if this year, as you quietly built the base for change in the future, you can't put that in a grant report, which is why I'm glad we're speaking to RootsAction. I'm so glad Emma Claire invited me, and she's a wonderful writer, organizer, researcher, which is great because people are like, Bill, how can you do this? I'm like, well, I'm not alone here. I mean, there's a lot of people doing amazing work. Many of whom will carry on long after I'm, sipping margaritas on the beach. Although I don't drink and I don't like the beach. But anyway, so I would say, we're doing this book, The Trillion-Dollar War Machine, which I was adamantly against doing when they asked me because they said, I've been doing this my whole life. The world's on fire. I can't disappear and write a book for 2 years. But my friend and colleague, Ben Freeman, I was visiting him and he says, hey, Bill, I have this great idea for a book. And it was exactly what the publisher wanted. So I said, great, well, we'll do it together. And then ends up this wonderful thing happened, which is Ben and his wife Anna had a baby 3 months after we signed the contract. So I did what I always do when I freak out. I write terrible sentences. So I just like poured out all this stuff. Ben helped me fix it. And the biggest problem was when we were ready to do the cover, we thought the $1 trillion war machine would be outdated by the time the book came out. That they would be spending more than $1 trillion. But the publisher said they liked the ring of it. So here we are. And I think, one thing that occurred was, we sold it based on an outline. And we mentioned, the tech bros. They're not all bros, but they act like them in Silicon Valley. And, kind of as almost as an aside. And we hadn't really delved into like how important they are politically, how unhinged they are ideologically and personally, and how if anybody is going to get us killed, it's kind of a competition between Trump, Netanyahu, and these Silicon Valley folks. So I think there's a new urgency, and of course they're selling themselves as we're nimble, we'll be cheaper, our technology will restore U.S. dominance in the world. We're the new patriots. We're founders. They kind of sell themselves as superior beings, and we're supposed to you sort of, thank them and also make them rich at the same time. So the question becomes like, how are these two factions going to relate? Andrew has a little manifesto called uh, Arsenal of Democracy 2.0. It's a pretty good critique of the big companies and parochial politics and all of that. And they basically say, well, these companies were good for the Cold War, but they can't make the new weaponry. They don't have the business model. They don't know the software. Let's give them a lifetime achievement award. Let them get out of the way, and we'll take over. Um, and because people are enamored with tech, and because they feel like, well, we got to have competition in the defense sector. This is a good thing, Bill. Um, but there's almost no way this turns out well if we let these people have more power. They're selling technology that doesn't exist yet, and making it sound like it's at their fingertips, and that technology will save us, which it has never done in the past. And the Alex Karp, the head of Palantir, has this wonderful book. I mean, wonderful if you're one of them, which basically says, America's kind of lost its way. We're a bunch of slackers. All we do is game and watch reality TV. We don't produce anything more. We need a unifying national mission. And lo and behold, what's it going to be? A new Manhattan Project for military applications of artificial intelligence. And he says in the book, well, we can develop a permanent superiority over China in this technology as if we're like fighting Iraq or something. I mean, this is this large, technically capable country with a growing economy. And if we want to poke them, they have many more resources to throw at their military that they're doing currently. And this notion, at the end of we're coming up on the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And there was that debate, should we control this technology? Should we eliminate it? What should we do? And the Hawks basically kind of sold the idea, well, we're in the driver's seat here. We've got these weapons. We can run the table on the notion that, oh, Russia and China won't get this stuff unless they cheat. And of course they did get it. And we've got the arms race. So now you've got this guy saying, oh yeah, we're gonna dominate and we're gonna have a permanent edge in this AI technology, and it's gonna restore American dominance in the world, which you may have noticed is not always a good thing. And so, you know, I think what Taylor alluded to, I think for the moment at least, they're going to feed both sides. The Lockheed Martin folks are a little more buttoned down, like they don't scream from the rafters, we're going to beat China, but they fund think tanks that say that. And they don't sort of glory in war, that they tell the investors, well, that turbulence will certainly create a market for our products. Whereas these other folks are like, I want to live forever. I'm going to colonize space. We're going to bury China. They're much more aggressive in their presentation. Um, and their weapons have a lot of dangers associated with them, including the idea of if you think you're not going to pay a price, you can inflict great damage on others. And essentially, in my view, the United States is a declining imperial power. And the question is, can we age somewhat gracefully, or we're going to take the rest of the world down with us? And a lot of Trump's policies actually, I think, are accelerating decline because they are getting rid of tools that like a more quote unquote intelligent imperialist would want. Like, well, there's ways to use foreign aid for leverage, and there's ways to use international institutions to advance U.S. interests and so forth. Their policy seems to be we're going to bulk up the military, which is going to be like a version of the Michigan militia with better guns. Let's get rid of diversity. Let's get rid of anybody who would stand up to the president. Let's not have a military that represents the scope of America. Let's not remember that their first job is supposed to be to honor the Constitution, not put down demonstrations in Los Angeles. Um, so it's a new level. It was, I think, it was all present, but Trump is just screaming it from the rooftops. Even if you look at things like, kind of the racial underpinnings of American society. When Ronald Reagan ran for president, he announced at Philadelphia, Mississippi, which was where 4 civil rights workers had been murdered in the 60s. And they said, oh, it's a racist dog whistle. Well, Trump, it's a racist bullhorn. It's every day. It's relentless. They're trying to try to normalize racism to every possible degree, including let's rename the forts after the Confederate generals. I want to call them the Reds. Things that seem, and in some ways are secondary, but are indicative of a particular ideology that is particularly, I think, dangerous and, um, I think not necessarily un-American, but inhumane. It's not what we should be about. So, I think to turn this around, there's certainly the money factor. There's the fact that, our politics are such that all the things we could do that would build a more sustainable society and create more jobs are blocked in Washington. It's, capitalism for the rest of us and socialism for these big companies. Um, so there's a political blockage to doing what's rational. Even if you were kind of a middle of the road kind of, vaguely hawkish Democrat, this system doesn't really work. I mean, if the Pentagon wants to build new weapons, adjust strategy, Congress says no. It's like, oh, this ship doesn't work. We don't care. You can't retire it. So it's kind of this weird, the Pentagon budget's sort of like a sedimentary rock or something. There's just like generations of things that they've built and they rarely get rid of anything. And now, things like Golden Dome, which is, I mean, back when Reagan said he was going to have an impenetrable missile shield, practically every scientist who wasn't on the payroll of the industry said that's not possible, and they were correct. But back at the time, Edward Teller, who was the father of the H bomb, among other things, was whispering in Reagan's ear, "Oh yeah, lasers in space, that's the solution." Well, it ends up the lasers in space dissipated; they couldn't really do anything. But in the meantime, they had put an artist's conception of this thing on the cover of Time magazine. A lot of people thought we had it. So they've already proven that this leak-proof system is not going to work against ICBMs. And Trump says, well, also hypersonic missiles and low-flying cruise missiles. It's a fantasy, but it's also a huge boondoggle. And for the two factions of the industry, it couldn't be better because they're going to use some of the existing hardware that the Lockheed Martins and RTXs build, and then they're going to have an Anduril or a SpaceX or somebody kind of doing systems integration and targeting communications. Likewise, the F-47 is going to have these unpersoned, wingmen that'll be built by Anduril or one of these other firms. So at the moment, at least, they're feeding both sides of the beast. Maybe eventually they won't be able to do that, but there's very little discussion about, well, what's the strategy to defend the country? I'll end on this, but there was a congressional commission on strategic posture, co-chaired by John Kyle, who not only was the most anti-arms control senator in the history of the U.S. Congress, but had been a lobbyist for Northrop Grumman, which is the biggest nuclear weapons producer. And when they released this report, this was not mentioned. He was treated as just subjective observer of the passing scene. And then they had a hearing in the Senate Armed Services Committee, which was shameful. I mean, they're saying, this is what we need to protect the country. This should be our nuclear doctrine. This is what we should be spending. You would think they would ask questions about that, but most of them said, hey, this missile that we build in Arizona is the only one that can really block a hypersonic missile. Shouldn't we spend more on that? Or from Nevada, well, the Nevada test site, there's a lot of investment that needs to go in there that, we got to accelerate that, right? Or like the guy from Alabama is like, we make everything. We're amazing, And then finally, Senator Warren says, well, just out of curiosity, what is your plan going to cost? So the former lobbyist for Northrop Grumman says, oh, cost. This is much too important to worry about cost. And of course, it segues with Taylor's work where they claim all these economic benefits, most of which are illusory. So, it's business as usual in Washington. Like people are like, how do you figure this out, Bill, about the pork barrel politics and the connection? Well, I watched the hearings. Like they're bragging about it. But, what would it take to have an actual conversation in the Congress that said, what's the best way to defend the country? It doesn't happen. It's all about money and kind of, just taking positions that they feel will so they can survive politically in the narrow sense of Washington, which is why whatever we do to turn this around, it's got to start outside of Washington. I won't get into deep critiques of my colleagues, but there's a lot of the DC-based groups have set their sights so low. It's like, what will Congress accept? Almost nothing. We need a new Congress. We need a new public consciousness. We need a larger movement. Ideas alone are not going to do it. We need power, and we don't have that at the moment. So it's really, I think, the most important people on the call are the people, people from RootsAction who are trying to organize and change people's minds. And it's hard work, and we're up against, you know, frightening deadlines. If you look at both climate and the acceleration of militarism and conflict. But I think, we have to sort of get grounded. We have to fight back. We're going to be driven together across all these different issue areas, not just because they're related, in terms of changing the country, but because we have to defend ourselves from this regime, which is trying to undermine every possible critic. I mean, to me, what they did to the ceasefire movement at universities was like a test run for what they're doing to the rest of us, or what they're doing to immigrants and undocumented workers is what they're going to do to the rest of us. And it's well along. I really will stop. I talk too much, but uh, uh, the year before this was the centennial of the birth of James Baldwin, and there's a Black History library in Harlem, and they had a thing about the public intellectual. And so one of the panelists was a Palestinian woman, and when she spoke the truth, she got death threats. There was a couple African American professors, and they spoke truth to power. They got their jobs were threatened. And then there, here I am sitting in New York, kind of this cranky old white dude. And, I say the same thing, and they call me names, or they say, well, you're pro Putin, you're pro this, you're pro that. So in my darker moments, I'm like, well, at least I'm for something. But obviously that's not going to fly in the larger picture. But nonetheless, there's different levels of risk for different people and different kinds of activism. And I think we need to support the people on the front lines. We need to take whatever level of risk we're willing to take. Those of us who are more privileged, I think, have to be more vocal, especially now. We have a huge responsibility, and we have to act. A lot of people, I am betting there's tens of millions of people who are just like paralyzed by what these folks are doing. Steve Bannon said years ago, well, it's about muzzle velocity. If you fire 6 bullets at a time, they'll block 2 and the other 4 will get through. And that's kind of what the Trump folks are doing. And nobody has like the answer, but I think unless we pull together, unless we build community, unless we trust each other, unless we get emotion, we're not going to figure it out. And so I am strangely motivated, which is probably a good thing. But I also feel like, these people are trying to occupy my country and the world. I'm not going to let them occupy my mind. I'm not going to get depressed. I'm not going to stop fighting. I'm not going to stop working with these amazing colleagues I have. And I think we can turn this thing around, but it's a long-term fight. And so I think, I noticed in my student days, if we fought a couple of years and we lost, some people would say, well, I tried. And some of us stayed in it. And we need more people to stay in it because, the future of humanity is at stake one way or the other, either whether we survive or whether we build a world worth living in. I mean, it's not just about money and the grind. And I don't even know some of these people, like, what are they going to do with more money? I mean, is greed really a sufficient basis for humanity? So anyway, I'm maybe gone far enough, but all I'm saying is they're on the march, but they can't save capitalism. They can do an amazing amount of damage, and we need to mobilize even at the moments that we don't know exactly what the answer is. We have to get together. We got to fight. We got to stand up. We got to take risks, and we have to trust that we can turn this around. And it's not guaranteed, but it's necessary that we fight this fight. And I'm glad there's people out there doing this because I'm very grateful for every bit of organizing anybody does, because that's really what's going to turn this around. So thank you.
Teach-ins like this are a useful way to share expert perspectives with our communities and organizing groups, and we want to empower you to organize your own. We started the Teach-In Network as campus protests were being villainized across the country, as Bill just mentioned. And so our goal is to help make organizing a teach-in safe and easy. We provide resources and connect you with vetted expert speakers. The network is comprised of toolboxes that include primers, presentations, videos, and more. And of course, access to experts, many of whom are listed on our website, which I will post in the chat now. Here's a link with many of our speakers who have already agreed and are waiting on emails from us asking them to join a teach-in. We just organized an in-person one in Tucson that's going to be happening in a couple weeks. So I urge you, even if you never have, to take the next step and organize your own teach-in for your local organizing group or student group or whoever you meet with regularly or organize with. Please reach out to me via the Teach-In Network website, which you can get to through that link I just posted, or email me anytime at ryan@rootsaction.org if you want to organize with us. Thank you, and back to you, Emma Claire.